What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here with a new daily video. All of the stories therein are new to this channel as well as I can keep track of. So if you guys end up enjoying this video and you guys are enjoying these daily videos, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. It really helps the video to do well and ensures I can keep making these videos daily for a long time to come. If you guys have any thoughts you'd like to share in the comments, either about the stories or the video itself, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as one of my favorite parts about doing this is reading your guys' comments, even if I may not always be able to respond to them. Either way, I'm gonna let you guys enjoy the next hour or so of true scary stories, and I'll see you again at the end of the video. Thanks for watching. My story is going to be fairly simple. I apologize that there isn't going to be much build-up or anything like that. I apologize that there isn't going to be any mysterious person spotted sneaking around my house or anything. And I also apologize that there's not going to be a huge ironic twist near the end. My name is Brittany, and this happened when I was 12 years old. It was just an ordinary night, really. My parents had just told me it was time to go to bed. So I went and brushed my teeth, washed up, and got all ready to go to sleep. I had a pretty great room at that time. I had fully decorated it with strawberry shortcake themes, including this big canopy bed. I told my parents I was ready, turned off the light, covered up, and grabbed onto my favorite stuffed animal. Then I went right to sleep. Something, though, woke me up in the middle of the night. I had one of those old-style alarm clocks that had a regular face and bells on the top. Therefore, it was not digital. I couldn't make out the time in the darkness, and therefore I had no idea how long I'd actually been asleep. The meager light coming in through the window did nothing to help me out, but it did let me see that there seemed to be a man standing in my room. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see he was huge, and I didn't recognize him at all. He was dressed all in black, but he wasn't bothering to wear a mask. I could see his gray hair and mutton chops, and that he was holding a large knife. I made to scream, but before I had a chance to, the man grabbed me and held his hand tightly over my mouth. He flipped me over onto my stomach. I felt the tip of the knife as it first touched my neck, then it pressed tightly down. It hurt, bad. I whimpered. I felt tears running down my face. I was sure at this point that I was going to die tonight. I had no idea if he was going to do anything to me beforehand, but honestly, I wasn't thinking about that. Everything flashed through my head that I wanted to do in life, and in that moment I knew I wouldn't be able to do any of it anymore. As I lay there, the man pressing down hard on my back with his other hand. He pushed the knife even further against my neck. He wasn't trying to feel me up or anything. He was just pressing down on my back and keeping the knife pressed against my throat. All of a sudden, I heard a loud bang. The knife fell off my neck, and the pressure of the hand holding me subsided. I wasn't sure entirely what was going on. Someone grabbed me and pulled me out of the bed. It was my mom, and she was telling me to come with her and everything would be fine. My mom took me down to the living room and out the front door. In moments, the police had arrived and rushed into the house. I was still terrified, wondering where my dad was and what was going on now. Well, my dad was in my room. Apparently, the intruder had broken through the back kitchen door. My mom had gotten up and seen that someone had broken in. She ran to get my father, who in turn grabbed his gun and searched the house. He, of course, searched my room first and immediately found the intruder there. The bang was my dad shooting the bastard who had the knife against my neck. The man didn't die. I can't say I'm too happy about that, honestly. He was obviously willing to kill me, so I've always wished that gunshot would have killed him. I've never wished death on anyone else. I don't even support the death penalty, but I really wish that after what that man was willing to do to me, that gunshot would have ended his life. He did go to jail, though, for a very long time. The jail sentence didn't really help me at all, though. It didn't stop me from having nightmares nightly for years afterward. It didn't make it easier for me to trust people. I don't know. It didn't make it easier for me to be alone. It didn't pay for the therapy I've had for the past 35 years. It didn't do any of those things, but my dad and that gun saved my life, and I appreciate both of those things more than I can ever tell you. When I was 16, my parents decided to go away on a second honeymoon. I guess they hadn't done it any sooner because they didn't feel like they could leave me home alone in the house. For many years, I was too young to be home alone, and they didn't want to hire a babysitter to be with me for an entire week. Even when I was 15, they were worried I was going to be throwing parties and going wild while they were gone. I guess when they finally accepted the fact that I was a video game playing book reader and they didn't have to worry about that, they finally decided to go. I was having a pretty fun Friday night, just sitting in the lunar room and playing video games. I can't even recall exactly what game I was playing. I've played so many that it's not always easy to keep track of them. Suddenly though, someone rang the doorbell. I got up, not really thinking that much about it, only to be surprised when I saw a pizza man standing at the door. He was a big, older guy, looked to be in his 40s maybe, a lot older than I would normally expect a pizza delivery guy to be. He told me that he had my pizza right there. "I'm sorry, I didn't order a pizza," I told him. I was very confused. I knew that people had a habit of ordering pizzas and sending them to other people's homes as a sort of prank. Since just about everyone pays with credit cards nowadays, though, I really didn't think it was a prank I would ever get to experience. "Oh, well, that's strange," the guy said to me. "Well, they paid for it already and it's supposed to be delivered to this address, so guess you get a free pizza. Lucky you." Well, of course, I wasn't going to turn down a free pizza. I went ahead and grabbed it. I thanked the guy and he went on his way. The following evening, I was once again playing video games when I heard the doorbell ring once more. I went over to see who it was and was surprised to see the exact same pizza delivery guy as the night before. He had another large pizza with him. Sir, I didn't order it this time either," I informed him. He kinda shrugged his shoulders. "Are you sure your parents didn't order it or something?" he asked me. I told him no, my parents weren't at home, something which was obviously stupid to tell him in retrospect. "Well, I guess someone likes you or something. It's paid for again, so I guess you get another free pizza." I was a 16-year-old boy, so having a whole pizza 2 nights in a row was not a bad thing as far as I was concerned. Honestly, I didn't even care who had sent it to me. My only complaint this time was that whoever did it didn't include chicken wings. I barely even remember eating the pizza at all, to tell you the truth. The experience was all fuzzy. I don't even remember when I fell asleep. I definitely remember waking up though, and I'll never forget it. I woke up only to find I was tied and gagged, laying down on the couch. This was obviously weird. For a few moments, I didn't even realize who I was. It seemed like I was in this dark non-existence. Then when I woke up, I was just there. It's so hard to explain if you've never gone through it before yourself. It took me a few moments to get my bearings and to figure out what was going on. The house had been ransacked. Things were broken, and I would later find that many things were missing as well. The worst part, though, was that there were 2 guys skulking about the house. One of them was the pizza guy from earlier. It suddenly occurred to me that he must have drugged me and broken into the house while I was out. I tried my best to remember their features, on the off chance that if I got out of this, I could tell the police. I thought that if they'd tied me up, at least that meant they probably weren't going to kill me. They could have easily killed me while I was out. One of the men turned towards me. I very quickly snapped my eyes shut. I didn't want them to know I was awake. I heard one of them walking up to me, and then something smacked me hard in the head. Everything went black once again. Next thing I knew, I woke up in the hospital. My parents were there, and I was being treated for a concussion. Apparently, one of the guys had noticed I was awake and hit me in the head. They had, in fact, drugged that pizza, and I still had traces of the drug in my system. I felt miserable afterwards. My neighbor had noticed a vehicle in the driveway, luckily, and called the police in time. They knew my parents weren't home and that I did not have a car myself. When they got there, the burglars were just leaving, and they were arrested immediately. An ambulance was then called for me. Although the burglars did get caught, it wasn't exactly a win-win for my family. I mean, the concussion was dreadful, and many of our things had been broken by the burglars. I had a really hard time being alone in the house after as well, for a very long time. Hi, I'm Ethan. When I was growing up, I was definitely a bit of an unpopular and bookish sort. I got bullied quite a lot. It was a shame because I actually enjoyed going to school. There was this one guy at school named Richard who always made going extremely sucky. He was one really messed up kid, always trying to get into fights with everyone. Once, on the way home from school, I saw him hanging out in an empty lot with his buddies, torturing a bird. They had shot it with a BB gun and ripped its feathers out while it was still alive. The guy obviously had some severe mental issues. Fortunately for me, he and his friends did not catch me that time, and I ran off as quickly as I could. In regards to me in particular, he would call me all sorts of names. Knock my books out of my hands, typical bully stuff. He would always try to get me to fight him, but of course I never wanted to do that. When I was 13, my parents were going to be at a party very late one night. I was an only child, and they felt their teen was now old enough to stay home alone. So they left me. They gave me a number I could call for emergencies, but this was long before cell phones. They let me know they wouldn't be home until very late, like in the late morning. That was okay with me though. I would get to stay home and read and enjoy my alone time. About an hour after my parents left, the phone began to ring. I answered it and froze when I recognized the voice as being Richard, the bully. "Hey, Slur here. I know your parents aren't home tonight. No one is going to protect your ass this time." I didn't even respond. I just hung up the phone. I walked away, but immediately as I did, it rang again. I picked it up and there was Richard. "Don't you dare hang up on me, you loser. I'll rip your fingers off your body with a pair of pliers." I told him I would call the police if he tried to do anything to me, and hung up the phone again. It began to ring, but I didn't want to answer it. Richard was being more persistent than I ever imagined he would be. The phone continued to ring again and again and again. Not knowing what else to do, I picked up the phone and set the receiver down on the counter, then went on my way. If I couldn't keep him from calling me, at least I could keep from hearing the phone over and over. I went back to my reading and was surprised at how easily I was able to get Richard out of my mind. That was until less than an hour later, when I heard a knock on the door. I got up to answer it, but immediately I could see it was Richard through the window. He was standing on the porch holding a pair of pliers. "I warned you not to hang up on me again. I'm gonna rip your fingers off, all 10 of them. I felt my heart freeze. There was no way I was gonna let him into the house, obviously, but there was a chance he'd be able to break in. I ran into the kitchen and grabbed the phone. I hung it up, but when I took it back off the cradle, there was no longer a dial tone. I tried to click it a few times before it occurred to me that Richard must not have ever hung up his phone. Back then, if the caller didn't hang up, the receiving phone couldn't make another phone call. It was then that it got much worse. I heard the glass door shatter, and Richard began to scream at me. "After I take your fingers off, I'll use these pliers to rip off your little balls, too." I didn't know what to do next. I couldn't call my parents, and I couldn't call the police. I definitely couldn't get out of the house and run. My parents didn't have a gun, and I couldn't fight Richard off in the time between him breaking the window and him trying to get his hand on the doorknob. A million thoughts flashed through my mind. Finally, I got a flash of inspiration. I ran into the living room to the fireplace. I grabbed the poker, ran over to the door, and when he tried to put his hand through the window, I slashed his hand as hard as I could. He immediately recoiled backward. The stuff he began screaming at me then was much worse than anything I had heard before. For some reason, Richard decided it was a good idea to put his hand back through the window, so I smacked it again and again. He was screaming and swearing, telling me all the horrible things he was going to do to me, but I was sure I'd broken his hand by that point. His screams attracted the attention of one of my neighbors, who rushed out of the house to see what was going on. I screamed for them to call the police. Richard finally realized he had lost, and he ran off after. He was arrested and sent to juvenile hall. Having him gone was very peaceful, but I will never forget that night. For context, I'm now 26, and I met my stalker at 14 or 15 years old. When I was around that age, I decided to take some ballroom dance classes. That sort of thing was normal for teenagers in my generation in my country. There, you had to change partners each song, so each girl would get to dance with every boy. In my group that mostly consisted of teens between 14 to 17, there was this one really tall, almost 2-meter, 21-year-old guy named Philip. We had a nice chat the times we danced, but I could tell he was a bit weird. Because I was young and naive though, that's how I normally made friends. I told him where I lived when he asked me honestly. And so the stalking began. At the time, I didn't realize it was stalking. I just thought he had a bit much free time and was somewhat annoying. Philip would ride his bike from his home one town over to my house and asked if I wanted to spend time outside with him and play together. After doing that multiple times, I asked my parents to tell him I was not home when he would come over. Both my parents and I were very oblivious about his actions for a very long time. At one point in time, this ended for a few weeks, and Philip also did not come to dance class in the meantime. At that time, I became part of a friend group of a boy I fancied. Unfortunately, Philip was also friends with the best friend of this guy, so he was a part of the group as well. They told me Philip was in a mental hospital. In the span of his stalking, Philip was in the hospital several times. Every time he was, I was glad I finally had some peace. When I reached 16, my family and I had to move because our landlady threw us out. We moved one town over, and to my misfortune, started living 2 streets apart from my stalker apparently. He started appearing all the time. At my father's birthday, he rang, and because my family had guests, they told me to open the door. There he was, standing over me, like a dark, menacing shadow. I told him to leave and tried to close the door, but he blocked me in. There I was standing, afraid of him, begging him to leave. I even ran inside to get my dad to send him away, only for my dad to tell me, "He's your friend, so it's your problem." After 2 hours of harassing me, he finally left. At this point, it was obvious for me he was a stalker, and he was fixated on me. The next day, I sat down with my parents and told them I was afraid of Philip. My dad apologized to me for not realizing the situation and helping me the other day. The next time Philip came to my house, my dad was there and told him not to mess with me anymore. To our surprise, he left right away. After a few more incidents with my dad showing up every time, he stopped showing up to my door. I thought we'd finally gotten rid of my stalker. Every time I started to live happily and started to forget my fear of him though, he'd send a letter or an email or a gift would randomly show up at my workplace to send me back into my fears. At 20, I finally finished school. To pass the year I had to wait to start my new job, I worked in a grade school as a voluntary after-school club member for grade schoolers. After a month or two, my mom woke me up in the morning and rushed me to get dressed, telling me she'd had to call the cops. Apparently, Philip was again every morning at our door, asking for me. My parents never told me though, so I wouldn't get scared of him again. That was until he showed up at like 4 a.m. Finally, after the cops came and told Philip 3 times to leave, he ignored them and they arrested him. He screamed and screamed my name, that he was burning for me and the cops were hurting him. My parents and I stood there in horror in the kitchen listening. The situation was so absurd I started laughing hysterically. We filed a report for stalking and trespassing, but the officers said they couldn't do anything because he hadn't hurt me physically. We tried to get a restraining order, but the judge said no. A few weeks later, Philip snuck into our garden and like a movie began to throw rocks at my window in the middle of the night. Idiot me looked out the window. I didn't see anything at first, until it clicked in the moment. I ran downstairs and told my dad he was in the garden. He hopped the fence and escaped. A week after that, I was in the kitchen cooking when Philip rang the doorbell. Because we had no way of seeing who was at the door, I opened it just a crack. There he was again, telling me he missed me so much that he was peeking through the blinds of the windows in the living room the past several weeks just to see if I was there. I had to swallow my fear and stand in the doorway, listening to Philip talk until my boyfriend came to help me. I had sent him an SOS when I'd first seen it was Philip. After my boyfriend arrived, he told Philip to leave, and he did. After that, I didn't see Philip again for a long time. A friend told me he was taken in by men in white coats because he believed his mom was possessed by the devil. I was glad he might finally get some help. It wasn't until 2 years later when I got a letter from the court. I was a witness and told to attend the case of an assault by Philip. Apparently, after exiting that mental hospital, he got into a big fight with his girlfriend who he apparently had. He beat her up so bad she had to play dead because she was scared. Philip called the ambulance and the police finally had something against him. After hearing he was admitted again to a mental hospital, I finally got a restraining order and he was ordered to stay at least 30 meters away from our property. I was so glad. The restraining order also implied that if he broke any of the requirements, he would go to jail. So, it was over. 2 years ago, I moved out of my parents' house as well. I'm only posting this now because I believe I'm seeing him around again. It can't be because he doesn't know where I live and he hadn't shown up at my parents' house in a long time, but I believe it's him. I need some reassurance that it's not and that I'm safe at my home. My initial curiosity about the deep web came from listening to various YouTube narrators who tell stories of all the horrible things that happen to people whenever they decide to surf it. I suppose a lot of people take these stories as some sort of warning to keep as far away as possible, but there are probably some people out there who want to go on the deep web because they're looking for danger. And then there's people like me. People who realize that deep web stories most often happen to be a bunch of bullshit. Now, I know there's a difference between the deep web and the dark web. Obviously, when most of us are talking about the deep web, what they really mean are those shady corners where all the bad stuff happens, the dark web. I went in and did some research on the actual deep web and found something I believe to be more true. Rather than a haven for all sorts of criminal activity, it's mostly just a big catalog of scanned documents people don't care about and random websites. Something like business documents that have no purpose appearing on Google search anyway. I've expressed my disbelief in this sort of thing to various people who post deep web stories. Generally, they tell me I'm a stupid idiot and the deep web is the most dangerous place of all. I simply laugh at them. After I posted a negative comment about the deep web believers on one of these videos, I got some private messages daring me to go on to the deep web, if I was brave enough, of course. I answered and explained it had nothing to do with bravery or lack thereof. I simply didn't know how to access it myself and didn't really feel like researching it and being bored off my ass. One of the people challenging me told me he would explain to me step by step how to do so. He also said he knew of a particular website I could go to that would be anything but boring. It was a game of sorts. He told me that if I'd ever played Clue before, it was a lot like that. So I would be going on to the deep web per his instructions, and I would have an activity to do. If I was as brave as I thought I was, then I would do it. The criteria I had laid out for not wanting to go there had been taken care of, so basically it was now put up or shut up for me. I decided to go ahead and do it. I figured, what do I got to lose? It would be funny to go ahead and see what all this fuss was about anyway. Or wasn't about, if nothing was actually there. The guy explained to me what to do, I got the Tor browser, and he gave me directions on how to get to this game of his. I was in the mood to be scared. And although I didn't really believe it would happen, I decided to go ahead and make the atmosphere in my house as creepy as possible. I went into the kitchen because we have a bunch of glass doors there. At night, the room can have a very creepy ambiance. I set my laptop on the desk and followed the man's instructions. I was a bit disappointed when I got to the website, I must say. It was less like a modern-day computer game and more like one of those text-based games from the earlier computer days. You know what I mean, like the Zork games. First, it asked me to input my name. My name is Alex, but I wasn't going to use that since it's my real name. I typed in Josh instead. I may not believe in the insidious nature of the deep web, but that didn't mean that I didn't want to be cautious with my information while I was there. The rest of the game played out in a very strange way. It gave me a list of names, much like the ones you would get from a Clue game, but much more comical. More along the lines of Colonel Mustard and Sergeant Ketchup. And no, I'm not kidding at all. The game itself was like 20 questions almost. I would have to ask questions in order to find who the victim was, what room they were, what weapon they were killed with. In order to come to any conclusions, I had to eliminate rooms, weapons, and people by asking these questions. Actually, it was quite a lot of fun. I found myself getting really into it. I must have been playing about an hour and a half when I had finally asked the maximum number of questions aloud. Then, up on the screen popped the instructions, "Guess the victim." Honestly, I have no memory of what I typed in. I typed in a name, a weapon, a room. It took me a moment, but the game then told me my answer was incorrect. The next line sent a chill down my spine, a part of the game I will never forget. The victim is Alexander, in the kitchen, with a butcher knife. I stopped and several things rushed through my mind. How did they know my name? I mean, that was scary enough, but how did they know I was in the kitchen? Was someone watching me? I jumped up and ran over and turned on the outside lights. I was scared someone might be seen outside the glass doors watching me, but of course no one was there. I made sure the doors were locked before going back to my computer. I left the website and closed my laptop shaking. Eventually, I asked a more savvy friend about it. He was really good with computers. He told me it was just some website set up by a hacker or something, which turned my laptop into a webcam through the internet. He said they'd hacked into it and got my name. I really had no idea people could even do that. I don't really want to have any idea. I don't know if it was just a trick or what. Maybe even the guy who challenged me had set it up himself to scare me. But nothing actually happened to me, so that's good at least. I'm a big professional wrestling fan. Please don't give me crap about it being lowbrow entertainment and fake and blah blah blah. I know it's lowbrow and fake. That's exactly what I love about it. I'm also a fan of horror. I mean, I guess I'd have to be if I'm submitting horror stories to a YouTube channel. I also heard that many people are skeptical about what happens on the deep web, so I want to share an experience that I personally had. Now, I'm not one of those people who downloaded Tor and went to a horrible website, then got scared by scary pictures and deleted it, never to return again. I've had Tor on my computer for quite a long time now, actually, and I still have it on me now. I figure, I'm not really doing anything illegal myself, so might as well see what I can find on there. Hell, I'm even a member of several forums on there. I'll be honest though, the majority of what I've seen on the deep web pales in comparison to the stories I've heard. One thing that sticks out with me more than anything else though, is the video of a wrestling match I saw on the deep web. I found out about this match because another guy on one of the forums I post on saw I had quoted Ric Flair as my signature. He asked me if I liked pro wrestling. I let him know that I really enjoyed it. He asked me if I wanted to watch something real sick then, and he would direct me to it. I'm not sure at first if I wanted to. Wrestling is something I enjoy, but it's not really something I want to mix with horror. Kind of a weird mixture, I mean, I still haven't even seen the movie Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies, and that already looks really bad. Maybe it might be enjoyable though. The guy insisted the video on the deep web was really cool and disturbing, and promised me I would not regret it. Alright, before I go any further, I have to tell you it's probably not what you're thinking. What I saw was not someone getting brutally and savagely killed or beaten half to death in the rain or something. I'm sure that's where your mind must have been going. Wrestling match on the deep web ends up being a snuff film match, but that's not it. I went to the website with the video on it and let it start to load. It took nearly 5 minutes to even begin playing. It was like one of those low-quality porn sites with a ton of ads and videos that never play when you go in. You know the ones I mean. Don't lie, you've been there and we all know it. Anyway, when the video started playing, it was pretty weird. It was taking place in an actual wrestling ring, but it looked like it was set up in someone's basement. There was barely enough room for anything other than the ring itself. The ceiling was so low that no one could get on top of the ropes if they were in the mood to. I kept on wondering what could possibly make this match so special. I found out pretty quickly, though. A man dressed in black spandex, sort of like a Venom costume if you're familiar from Spider-Man, was standing in the corner of the ring. The camera then showed me his opponent, a man lying in the center. He had one of those wrestling masks on, but there was no doubt by the look in the man's eyes that this person was already dead. The bell rang, and I witnessed the worst thing I ever saw in my life. The alive wrestler ran over and dropped an elbow onto the dead one with a sickening thud. The dead body randomly wriggled around. The alive wrestler used holds and moves on this corpse. I won't explain the whole match to you, but I'll explain why it was so disturbing. The dead man's eyes were always facing the camera. You could see they were empty, and his body was so stiff the alive wrestler could barely even move his limbs. Whenever he tried to pick up the corpse's arms or legs, the body would just flop about randomly on the mat. Another disturbing fact, the dead body did not have much flexibility, so as you can imagine, the moves were very awkward. The absolute worst moment came, though, when the live man grabbed the dead one's legs. They flipped the corpse over onto its stomach and put it into a Boston crab, which is where the wrestler bends the prone wrestler's legs backwards over his back and sits down, basically bending the person's spine in the wrong direction. Well, normally that's just a wrestling move, but instantly I heard a sickening crack, and I saw the dead body's eyes staring at me as his body folded in half. That was more than I could take. I clicked out of the video. I tried to find a happier website on the shallow web to get the look of those dead eyes out of my mind and to forget that sickening cracking noise. I don't know if it's illegal to wrestle with corpses, and I couldn't really care less, honestly. Although I still do surf on the deep web, I've never been curious enough to go back to that site and finish watching that disgusting video. Yeah, I know you're probably skeptical about the deep web too. My thoughts on it are this. You might not see someone getting killed or whatever. Someone might not find out where you live and stalk you, but that doesn't mean there aren't some freaky-ass things on there. I, 40 and female, went to the university at Buffalo fresh out of high school in the early 2000s or so. At that time, the online world was a bit like the Wild West. It included having to do quite a bit more digging to find out specific information, rather than today's split-second Google search. As such, it was a much easier time for colleagues in universities to hide or spin campus crime statistics to make themselves look better for prospective students. Case in point, I was at an orientation a month or two before my freshman year. One of the mass presentations I had to attend was about campus safety. Bright-faced upperclassmen orientation aides enthusiastically verbally felated the school, boasting about how North Campus was at the time, the safest town in the country. The only murder in recent history had occurred 9 years ago, to an unfortunate student named Linda Yalem, who was murdered on the campus's bike path during a lone early morning run. It was a fate that we were assured could be avoided simply by not hitting the bike path alone. What they conveniently neglected to reveal during this presentation was that A, the killer had never been caught, and that B, Yalem was not his only victim. He was a serial attacker, and eventually a serial killer, who had already been active in the area for at least 25 years in downtown Buffalo. On the secluded bike paths of the Buffalo suburbs, nowhere was safe. In retrospect, had this information been as readily accessible as it is now, it probably would have kept me from the most bone-chilling encounter in my life. Fast forward 3 years for now, though. I was a very depressed 20-year-old who was struggling with her sexual identity, and her parents' reaction to it in a much less accepting time than now. I'd left school, and to avoid being home, shacked up with a woman who promised me the world, then rejected me in favor of her ex-girlfriend on the very night I moved in. So, clearly I was a very unhappy young adult, desperate for love and a sense of belonging, sometimes to my own detriment. Despite my roommate's many unkind and hurtful gestures, I stuck with it in the naive hope that she would eventually come around and fulfill her pie-in-the-sky promises to me. On a particular July night, that hope just fell flat altogether. I was at Roxy's Green Room, a now defunct lesbian bar and club that many wayward Buffalo lesbians, myself included, flocked to at night to feel a much-needed sense of community, and hopefully to land a special someone. Since the latter was just not happening for me, I was still stuck with my roommate. She liked to dangle emotional carrots overhead out of some sick joy she got from making me hurt but also hang on to hope. After a promise to hit Roxy's alone with me and talk about us finally, she showed up with her ex turned current and shut me out completely. I was upset enough to leave alone at around 1 a.m., well before the 4 a.m. last call. I was young and spry enough to walk without a ride home, which my usually wiser self would have secured before leaving. While my apartment was technically walking distance, it was a good half-hour walk or so. Being as emotionally charged as I was, I angrily hoofed it down the main street sidewalk, managing to follow the pedestrian rule of walking against traffic. Despite stupidly ignoring the rule I knew well from years of watching forensic shows, if you're a woman, never leave a bar at night alone, especially if you have to walk a long distance. I gotten exactly halfway there when a dark green sedan started driving toward me. I thought nothing of it until the car slowed down near me as I walked by. A lone middle-aged man was in the car, with a skin tone I originally associated with being Italian, but in retrospect could have easily been Puerto Rican or something. He had dark hair, and most importantly, his dark eyes seemed to hold no light of good intentions. I was used to guys being pigs. I'd been catcalled and endured all manner of wholly unwanted, graphic, and hand-fisted advances from dudes everywhere. Although I'd never take the stance that I was asking for it, I was young and thin, so I was dressed in a tight red crop top with flare-legged black spandex pants that night. I didn't pay much attention though. A guy old enough to be my dad looking at me like that, I was simply annoyed. My walk quickly resumed. I put the guy out of my mind and continued onward, but the peace, of course, would not last. About 2 or 3 minutes later, I see a familiar green car coming up behind me again. This time, the guy's window was down a bit, and he shouted, "Hey!" He beckoned to me in a way that made me wonder if he might have mistaken me for a lady of the night. That really incensed me. I flashed him a quick, annoyed look to inform him that despite my mildly revealing clothing, he was barking up the wrong tree for several reasons. I ignored him and started walking faster. He sped off again, only to turn around once more. At that point, it became clear this dude was casing me, like a cat burglar cases a house. It was before the time of Uber, or even widespread use of cell phones. No cabs were passing by either. Public transit existed, but it was both sparse and not running nearby this area. The stretches of lane between intersections were long. Being 15 minutes away from either my home or going back, there was no way I could get anywhere near either place before the green car came up upon me again. I quickly thumbed through my mental list of true crime show-inspired safety tips that would have kept me out of this situation in the first place. Tip 1, get to an open business or something. Then the guy would either give up or get caught. I was coming upon a convenience store on the opposite side of the street, where I'd bought cigarettes earlier. As I got a bit closer though, I could see it was unfortunately closed. I looked around for anything else. Another bar, a gas station. The street was flanked by shuttered brick buildings and a locked-up church. Then came the headlights and the car once again. Again, the guy slowed down as he approached me, but his demeanor had shifted quite massively. He put his palm out impatiently, as if he couldn't understand why I wasn't coming with him. "Come on!" the guy yelled through his now open window. I kept out of arm's reach on the sidewalk and once again ignored him. This time I was properly shaken though. He hit the gas and sped off on his familiar circuit back around to me. Now I knew I was in trouble. I was genuinely scared this guy's next move would be to simply grab me off the sidewalk and pull me into his car. I scrambled to figure out what to do. I remembered making myself impossible to ignore and obviously in distress could get me some help from an outside party. I ran right into the middle of Main Street and started frantically waving my hands and shouting at every car coming my way. The first car drove by, the second as well. The terror in me was palpable. I knew the stories of city dwellers like Kitty Genovese who were left to their horrible fates at the hands of monsters by jaded throngs of people who'd heard the attacks and their cries for help, but did nothing. Just as I was beginning to lose hope, though, a van pulled over that had 4 black guys in it. In a game of numbers, this van of guys was much safer than that single stalker in the green car. I opted to take the gamble. I rushed over to them and told them about the man in the green car who was following me around the block over and over. I begged them for a ride home. The driver asked if I had any money in exchange for the favor. Unfortunately, I didn't. He then asked if I had any cigarettes at least. I may be one of the only people you'll ever meet who actually had their life saved by cigarettes. Yes, I answered urgently. I just bought a pack. You can have the whole damn thing if you get me home. Admittedly, I was a bit miffed that the driver wanted something from me in exchange for not letting me get abducted off the street. Still, I had the Marlboros, he had the vehicle, and the stars hopefully aligned. After a second or two of thought, the driver agreed. One of the 2 dudes in the back opened the side door for me and got out so I could slide into the seat behind the driver. As the door to my safe carriage full of impromptu nights shut and I got buckled in, I looked out the window just in time to see the green car creeping past the van, proving to my saviors that I was telling a very disturbing true story. Until my dying day, I'll never forget the look in that man's eyes as he was driving past. Feeling safe, surrounded in a closed van full of young, tough-looking rescuers, I looked that bastard dead in the eyes. He gave me the most hateful, evil look I'd ever seen. His eyes were black and thin, almost like a cat's eyes when its hunting instincts have been activated. He sped off into the night, and so did we, taking a less direct route to make sure we lost him. After a blessedly quick jaunt with frequent looks behind my shoulder, I was delivered home safely, 1 pack of cigarettes short, but alive and in one piece. The first thing I did when I got in the door was to check the locks on everything. After that, the adrenaline started to wear off, and the fear set in. I was terrified that the man in the sedan was searching the area where I got dropped off at. I grabbed the cordless phone and laid completely flat on the living room floor for hours to keep totally out of sight from any windows. As I laid there, I called the Buffalo police and relayed my terrifying tale in as much detail as I could give them. Fast forward another 4 years. I'd moved out to Chicago to live with my then girlfriend. For about half of my 4 years there, I was pretty homesick. I'd never lived anywhere except my home state of New York, and I went there knowing no one except my ex, who wasn't exactly an empathetic soul. I coped by keeping up on upstate New York news. On a chilly mid-January morning in 2007, I was at our computer looking up headlines from my home state, when one popped up that immediately snared my attention. Bike path killer arrested. By then, I knew the moniker well. The internet has since aged into a beautiful organized repository of knowledge, and despite the lack of transparency from my alma mater, I became familiar with the Buffalo area mystery man and his active status throughout my whole time in Buffalo. The man's name was Artemio Sanchez, a middle-aged native of Puerto Rico, who coached his son's sports teams and was affectionately referred to as Uncle Al in his neighborhood. As with many other killers, his disguises were his community involvement and being very ordinary. The man was estimated to have been responsible for 9 to 15 rapes around the area since 1975. He also confessed to 3 murders: the Yalem murder in 1991, a second one in 1992, and a third which only occurred 3.5 months prior to his capture. I don't know if you've ever felt your heart somehow get wedged into your voice box and get dropped into the depths of your stomach simultaneously, but believe me when I say it's possible, given the right catalyst. For me, that was the printed proof that the man who was active while I lived in Buffalo frequented the Roxy's area. Furthermore, I knew serial killers rarely take breaks as lengthy as the one between his 1992 and 2006 killings. He must have been attempting to sate his evil impulses on me that night. That realization gave me a very bad feeling that I'd crossed paths with someone more dangerous than I'd ever realized. Of course, as soon as I searched the man's name and found his picture, I was horrified, though not surprised, to see those same soulless predatory eyes I'd looked into on that summer night in Buffalo in 2003. This story takes place in a very small town in the northeast region of the United States. It was in the summer before I went off to college in 2015. After I graduated from high school, my parents decided to move to a smaller, more affordable house about 45 minutes north into the mountains. We stayed in my childhood home because the public schools in my area were the best in my state. My parents really valued my education. I ended up going off to an amazing university, and now I have an incredible career because of that education. As most people in the US know, however, amazing public education usually comes with higher property taxes. My parents got to the point where they could not afford the taxes on their 4,000 square foot home anymore, and decided to sell it just after I graduated from high school. Their home is humble and sits on a beautiful piece of land on the side of a beautiful mountain. And the trees are always so green, and there's a lot of wildlife around. They don't really have any neighbors either, as their driveway is 1.5 miles long. That's the place they chose to live in after I went to college, though. In August of 2015, we moved into this new house. I wasn't planning on staying long, as I was getting ready to head off as a freshman for the first time. We decided to have a little housewarming party, with a bunch of family friends and my best friend at the time as well. My dad was manning the barbecue, my mom was making drinks, and we were playing with our dogs. It was a grand time, and everyone was having extreme amounts of fun. My dad had built a brick fire pit in our backyard as well. Just to set the scene for you here, the fire pit was about 30 feet from our back patio door, and we had a picnic table and other seats all around. Behind the seating was the tree line. It was so dark sometimes at night, you needed a flashlight to even see 10 feet in front of you. With the fire pit lit, you couldn't see someone unless they were either sitting next to you or across from you in front of the pit. My best friend decided to stay the night, and we asked my dad if we could make some s'mores. It was getting a little chilly, as it tends to do in the late summer in a northeast at night. My parents left us outside with my dog, Nino. He was a loyal, incredible dog that my dad trained as his right hand. He was our protector, as he could run extremely fast, was very strong, and alerted us whenever something went bump in the night. Nino was laying in between us facing the tree line, and my best friend was to my right. Our backs were to the dark, dense tree line, our first mistake. We were laughing, joking, and eating s'mores together, planning for our future, and generally excited about going off to college together. She decided to play some music, and we relaxed there with one another, feeling content and at ease. It was the perfect summer night, really, until Nino suddenly started growling. I saw his ears perk up and his head cocked to the side. He sat up and continued to growl. My best friend and I looked at each other, thinking Nino must have seen a stray animal or something not that threatening. This area was known for lots of deer, maybe rarely a coyote or wolf. Since he was trained to help my dad hunt, we assumed it must be a buck or a fawn in the distance behind us. We went back to singing along to the music playing and talking about our fall 2015 class schedule. Again, Nino started growling. Our second mistake, we didn't call for my dad. We didn't even think there was a problem until Nino started getting much more loud and vicious. He stood bolt upright and started barking as if alerting us to activity beyond the tree line that we could just barely not see. We stood up as well, the fire obscuring our view. My best friend took her phone, paused the music, and switched on her flashlight. She started to walk toward the edge of the tree line, with Nino by her side going crazy. He was alerting us not to go any further and to call for help. We stood still in silence, listening. I was too afraid to even breathe at this point. My friend was about to start walking into the woods. When she shined her flashlight, though, it swept across a figure, someone peering out from behind a tree, a man with a green shirt and green pants on, about 5'11". We screamed and ran as fast as we could inside, leaving the fire unattended and this creepy man stuck behind the tree. What we didn't know at the time is where this man had come from. We crashed through our front door, breathless with Nino trailing behind us. It startled my mother, obviously, who was washing dishes and cleaning up. She was talking to my dad about something they'd seen on the news. We cut him off mid-sentence to explain there was a man dressed in all green lurking behind a tree in the woods. We didn't know how long he was there, or if he was still there, but we were both crying. I remember feeling extremely sick, like I was going to throw up. My dad jumped up, grabbed his shotgun and headlamp, and ran outside with Nino. My mom gathered us into the living room, shut all the lights in the house off, and locked the doors. She told us to be quiet, and she was going to call 911. As she did that, my best friend and I shook with fear. We were anticipating gunshots and screaming, but we never heard any. Now, my mom on the phone with 911 described what we saw to the operator. I heard her say "oh" in an alarming way after the dispatcher relayed some information we couldn't hear. At this point, my dad rushed back inside. My mom let him know the police were on their way. Being in a small town on a mountain with less than 10,000 people around means we don't get our own police force. We get the state police every time there's a call made to emergency responders. My dad put his gun away and waited for the police to show up. To our complete bewilderment, they didn't just send one officer like you'd expect, but 10, and an entire SWAT team. A helicopter started to circle the area as well. We were rightfully terrified. I was practically having a panic attack at this point. The officers came inside our home and asked us again what the man was wearing, what he looked like, if we were able to discern any scars or tattoos. We explained the weird matching green outfit and his glasses. The officer excused himself and alerted the SWAT members outside of our description. They started to search the woods behind our home with guns drawn and the helicopters circling above. They advised us to stay inside, and they would let us know when and if they found something. After about 25 minutes, we got another knock on our door. It was not one but two officers this time. My dad let them in, and they explained the situation. One officer explained that we must have seen on the news that a convicted felon from the prison about 20 miles away had escaped into the mountains. The police had tried to set up a perimeter 10 miles around the prison, but the convict had slipped through somehow. The outfit the man was wearing, as well as our description of him, signaled to them that this was the escaped convict that was lurking through our remote, densely wooded backyard at night. The all-green outfit was the standard issue for prisoners in my state back then. They did not, however, find the man. After 25 minutes of searching, he was still at large. The officers let us know they were going to have a squad car stay and watch our house for a few days. They were unable to locate him and believed he was still an active threat to our safety. That night, we all slept in the living room together. My dad's shotgun was within arm's reach at all times. Later that week, we got another knock on our door from the officers stationed outside. They let us know that the man was back in custody, and we now no longer had to worry. They advised us to install some security cameras and said how sorry they were this all happened to us. After that, my parents spent about $10,000 on cameras and fencing for our backyard. It's now all fenced in, and we have 4 cameras watching the tree line at all times. I guess you never know what will happen, or what goes bump in the night. I currently live in an RV in my mom's driveway. My town is just slightly larger than small, and it's relatively safe. Lots of rich people, doctors, and the like live here, so it's kept very nice and crime is relatively low. I never expected something bad to happen to me because of this, but tonight I met a certain man, and he was a reminder to me to always lock my door. Sometimes I forget, even while I'm sleeping. It's never really been a big deal to me because my town is generally so safe, but I'll be remembering every time from now on. It was around 2 a.m., and I'd just taken my garbage outside to the bin. When I turned around, I noticed a figure in the dark walking toward me. I started to quickly walk away, but the man called out to me. He was a short person, probably in his 50s or 60s. I'm 23, by the way. He started to talk to me about my RV. I took charge of the conversation and shut it down very quickly. He randomly told me what house he lived in, and his name as well. He was very polite, but he was giving a very off vibe. I'm sure nearly every woman knows what I mean. You know, that older man kind of creepy. Too polite to you just because you're a pretty young girl, that sort of thing. He told me I should come by his house sometime. Yeah, sure, maybe one day. Good night. I walked back to my RV and locked the door right away. I figured he'd just leave, but he didn't. I don't have a curtain on my window right now. I could hear him pacing outside my window and mumbling out loud to himself. I was hiding. I wanted to lock the door by my bed. I mean, it didn't open at all anyway, but I still wanted to lock it regardless. I got up and looked outside, only to see the man staring right in at me. He was waving at me to get my attention, walking right up to my window and acting completely erratic, so different from the way he'd just been acting. I locked the door and he watched me. After that, he left my window. I could feel he was still there though. 5 or so minutes passed by, and now he was knocking at the RV door. I waited there for about an hour before I grabbed a knife and took the chance to sprint to my mom's house. I'm definitely getting a taser or a gun after this. He'd been standing across the street, waiting for me. There's no reason for him to have been just outside my RV that long at 2 a.m. I think he'd been watching me for a while too. People shouldn't really know that I lived in that RV. Walking down the street, it's not something you'd initially note. I've only ever started to pay attention to the RVs and driveways since I started living in one, and still I don't notice if people are actually in them or not. I don't know, maybe I'm being naive, but it makes me wonder how long he's been watching me, seeing as how he knew immediately I lived in the RV that day. I don't really ever leave it much except for necessities, since I'm a complete homebody. So he'd have actually had to been watching for a long time to notice someone living in it. It terrifies me. I was afraid of his intentions. He made me realize that even though I live in a safe town, I'm still a young woman, and I'm a target on many men's lists. It sucks that that's the way it is, and it sucks there are people out there who are like this towards other people. This happened to us 2 years ago. We, myself, my daughter, and her father, lived in a shared house. This incident took place over the span of an entire month. So one day we decided to walk to the store as it was close by to the house and it was quite a nice day out. When we came back though, we noticed someone had tried to pry the locks off our door while we were gone. There were obvious dents and huge blue marks. There was a big boot print on our door as well, both the front and back doors. Someone wanted in real bad. I had no idea why though. We had nothing of major value and lived out in the hood. We had been gone for less than 20 minutes, so of course we were on edge. The person could very well still be around. We heard no sign of them for the rest of that day, but after that, so many bizarre things started to happen. I'm trying my best to explain this in a way that's easy to follow and to keep it short as well. If I listed out each and everything that happened that I'd noticed in my house, I'd be typing for many days. The most common thing was that I'd find things out of place where I know I didn't put them there. I'd noticed the locks on my old-ass windows were suddenly broken, or that my dish liquid bottle was broken as well. There was always this weird oily substance on random shit as well. On the curling iron in the bathroom, even on some of my daughter's toys. Later on, I went to take the trash out to the dumpster in the alley. When I lifted up the lid, I saw some type of homemade tool inside. It was a short metal rod with a washcloth tied around the end and a blue doctor's type glove on the other end. I realized this is what the person had been using on my door to try and pry open the lock. That's where the blue markings had come from. Well, holy shit. What else was out here in the trash? I took a look in my neighbor's dumpster as well, just because I had a bit of a suspicion. What I found made my heart sink. In their trash bag were several of my belongings, the most random stuff too. The title to my old car, which had been in a duffel bag in the top of my closet, some of my clothes, some makeup, random household items. At this time, the woman who lived next door saw me discovering this. She and the man who lived there with her started to yell at me quite loudly. She walked out and across the street. The man was just standing in the doorway giving me a death look. I was pissed and scared, coming to the realization that these people had been in my house several times. I looked up at them. "I know you guys have been in my house, you motherfuckers!" The immediate response? "Well, I didn't steal anything," with a smirk. Quick description of the man, a shirtless, fat, redneck old white guy. I was fucking losing it. The words slipped right out of my mouth. "If you do that again, I'm gonna burn your fucking house down." My mind was racing, thinking of all the times I discovered things out of place. My dish liquid bottle that was broken, well, it sat on the sink just below the window. They must have broken it through coming in. They'd been in my house multiple times. Cut to the chase. I called the cops, they came out, talked to the neighbors, and left right away. After they left, the man was out by my back door on the phone with someone with a big grin. Not 10 minutes later, 5 cars pulled up full of people. A big truck pulled up behind mine and blocked it in. A white guy with a tank top on and gold chains around his neck hopped out. He had a gun. I shoved a chair up against my back door and saw these people heading right for it. I screamed for my boyfriend, grabbed my daughter, and ran as fast as I could out the front door. At this time, there were people coming around the side of the house as well. I could hear them start shooting. I was almost off the porch. All I could do was scream for mercy and yell, "Please, no." We were running down the street as I was holding my daughter. Because I was running with her, she had no idea what was going on. I could just feel I was about to get shot in the back. I knew I was going to get gunned down in the street. Somehow, though, we made it around the corner and didn't die. Called the cops again, they searched and found no bullets. Took statements from the neighbors. I asked them to stay for a moment while I went into the house to grab some clothes, as we sure as shit weren't going to stay there tonight. When I went to grab the clothes and diapers, I saw an empty gallon of weed killer in my daughter's room. What the fuck? That must have been the oily substance I'd been coming across. In the time it took us to run, wait on the cops, and come back, they had re-entered my house again and poured weed killer all over my clothes, my daughter's clothes, and all her diapers. I gathered up what I could and left. Nothing ever came of it, of course. No arrests, and the last time I went back was to get the rest of my belongings and never come back again. There will be no answers to all my questions, and I still have nightmares about it. I'll never get closure either. My boyfriend showed me this sub a while back, and after lurking for a hot second, I realized I had my own story to tell. The summer of my junior year in high school, I'd been romantically involved with a guy. We'd gotten to the point in our relationship where he was ready for me to meet his friends. We decided it would be cool if we all went to the state fair that was in town for the next few days. With a little bit of planning and corralling, we all hopped into my boyfriend's little Taurus and headed for the city. Keep in mind, we're all a bunch of dumb, edgy teenagers, so a pre-game hotbox was a must for any event. With the exception of my boyfriend who was driving, we were all pretty damn high. At one point, one of the girls in the car suggested we pull over and get some snacks from the gas station coming up. For whatever reason, I was the one who managed to get stuck with the job of running in and grabbing what everyone wanted. I was annoyed, but pretty desperate for his friends to think I was cool. I jotted down everyone's requests on my phone and headed inside. I walked up and down a few aisles for a bit, trying to find what I could from the list. Around the end of my little shopping spree, I picked up a bag of chocolate-dipped pretzels and turned to head to checkout. That was when an older man in the row behind me called out and asked me to toss him a bag. I of course thought nothing of this and figured I'd save him the trip and be nice. I threw one over to him. I took my snacks to the counter, and that was when I noticed the man was now following me. He asked me a few questions, like my name and where I was headed with all that food. I don't know if it was because I was blitzed or just stupid, but I happily answered all his questions, even telling him my real name and that I was headed to the fair with some friends. He smiled and told me my name was the same as his daughter's name. He seemed polite enough, maybe a bit too chatty and bad with social cues, but otherwise harmless. It was then that he offered to pay for my things, telling me I should save my money for the fair. I shook my head and insisted it was fine, but thanked him for the offer. He slapped his hand hard on my shoulder. It lingered for a bit too long. He whispered and told me not to move, and he'd get his wallet from his truck. I started to feel a bit uneasy then. I exchanged glances with the woman at the counter, and I could tell the weird feeling was mutual. I tried to use him going to his car as a chance to fish out my money, pay for my shit, and get the fuck out of there. I grabbed my receipt and started sprinting towards the car when the man made a beeline right for me in the parking lot. He wagged his finger and scolded me for leaving without waiting. I uncomfortably laughed it off and told him I should be getting back to my friends. They'd been waiting for a long time. It was then that he steered the conversation away from the snacks and asked me if I wanted to see some pictures of his daughter. He told me he kept them in his glove box, and if I wanted to see them, it would only take a second. Finally, alarms were going off in my stupid head. I declined him and told him I really needed to go right now. He reached a hand out and grabbed me by the arm towards him, repeating over and over again that it would only be a couple of minutes. I panicked and started screaming, trying to yank my arm away. That was just enough of a reaction to start turning heads in the parking lot. The man let go of me and rushed back to his car. Hyperventilating and clutching my bag of snacks, I sprinted to the Taurus, where I was bombarded with questions from my boyfriend and his friends. Apparently, everyone had thought I knew the man up until I started screaming. They intended to come out and help once they realized what was going on, but the interaction had just ended that fast that they were unable to do anything. For a few hours, I considered reporting the incident to someone, but I figured I didn't have enough info or reasoning to justify it. I still can't help but think what would have happened in that parking lot had it been a little emptier, or if I'd come alone. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.